Hello, my name is Ken Willer, and I'm an immigration attorney at the North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic. Today's video is about DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly mention that this is being videotaped in January of 2021. So if you are watching this in the future, please remember that things can change. They always do in immigration, and especially for the DACA program. Once again, this is from the North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic. We are located in Highland Park. Our mission is to provide accessible, quality, pro bono or free legal services in the area of immigration, domestic violence, and housing to give those in need of access to justice the opportunity to live productive and secure lives. Once again, we have 3 separate practice areas with attorneys in each one of them who specialize in them. They are immigration, which I am part of, domestic violence, and housing. Back to today's topic, DACA. We want to quickly discuss how it came to be. DACA first started in the year 2012. It was created by an executive order by President Obama. And this is important to remember because unlike many other areas of law, this was not passed by Congress. And therefore, the way it can change is a lot more fluid. For example, with the new coming administration, they may be able to make changes to DACA very quickly because, again, it does not necessarily require the consent and approval by the Congress, by both houses of Congress. So once again, this was an executive order. It was started under the Obama administration, and it started in 2012. Now, a lot has changed since 2012. Under the Trump administration, there were many changes. The Trump administration, about 2 or 3 years ago, tried to close the entire program and was mostly unsuccessful. Again, important to note that Congress never acted on DACA, whether to approve of it, to change it, or to end it. So for the most part, during the Trump administration, the program had been under legal review by many different courts. And to make a long story short, where we are currently is that DACA is back to its full, complete order as it was in 2012. And again, this has been reviewed under many different courts. It's just important to remember that many of these court challenges were not about the merits of DACA, so whether DACA itself is legal, but more about how the changes to DACA were made. So again, where we are at now is that DACA is back to its full 2012 status, meaning that people who don't have DACA can apply for DACA, people who have DACA can still apply for DACA, and the terms of DACA have not changed. Just to remember, though, that again, as of December of last year, 2020, a court decided that the last change that Trump tried to make was not legal because his Secretary of Homeland Defense at the time, Chad Wolf, had not been confirmed by the Senate. And again, I'm only mentioning it because the court's not saying that DACA is legal or illegal based on its actual merits, on what it is, how it works, only about the way that that the Trump administration tried to change it. So what is DACA and what are the benefits of DACA? There are 3 main benefits. Again, so DACA is a term for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So of course what that means is those who have DACA and who have remained under its terms, the government has promised not to start removal actions against DACA grantees. That is the main premise of DACA. In exchange for coming to the government, explaining who they are, how you came to the U.S., the government also will give you work authorization. So again, you'll have a social security number that'll allow you to work just as anyone else under any sort of visa status or long-term or permanent residency or citizenship. And finally, in certain circumstances, it is possible to ask for permission to leave the country and to return. We'll talk about that a little more. And again, that's called advanced parole. And at the bottom of the screen here, you see there's the first document on the left that is an example of work authorization card. In the middle is a social security card, of course. And to the right, I believe, is an approval notice. That's what they look like when you get approved for DACA. Who qualifies? What are the requirements for DACA? There are 7 main requirements, and we'll go through them together. The first one is that you are under the age of 31 as of June 15th, 2012. So What this means now, of course, is that the people who qualify for DACA, it doesn't necessarily change. So, for example, unfortunately for people who are younger, well, we'll get back to that for the second part, but it's not for everyone. It is for a specific age group of people. The second requirement, that you came to the US before reaching your 16th birthday. So again, for people who arrived to the US as adults, unfortunately, DACA wouldn't apply to them. And the third requirement, you've been continuously residing in the US since June 15th, 2007 until the present time. That's the big one. And again, it means that, for example, unfortunately for people who are, born after 2007, there's no way that they could currently qualify under DACA. You had to be in the US physically on June 15th, 2012, and at the time you make your request for DACA. Again, that seems like it makes sense for the third part, but again, there may be small exceptions to whether, if you made a very brief trip outside the US between 2007 and the present, that may be allowable. If that is the situation, that we definitely recommend, speaking with an attorney before applying, of course. You had no lawful, so going back to the requirements, you had no lawful status on June 15th, 2012. There is an education requirement. You must either be in school, you must have either graduated high school or obtained a GED, or you were honorably discharged from the Coast Guard or Armed Forces of the US. So, there are many people who did not graduate high school and who still don't have a GED. That's okay. It is still possible to start with the GED, especially, it's a good time now that, GED programs are accessible online. And since many of us are at home, that can be something to look into as well. And then there is a criminal and national security issue as well. That's the seventh and last requirement. If you were convicted of a felony or significant misdemeanor, you do not qualify. So what is a significant misdemeanor? There are, an example that would be a DUI or domestic violence. Or if you committed 3 or more misdemeanors, that would also disqualify you. Lastly, you see there it says, or you do not otherwise pose a threat to national security or public safety. That is kind of a catch-all that, again, whenever applying to immigration, there's always a chance that immigration has the authority to reject a case, and they may use that as an example as to why someone may not qualify. So again, if you do have a criminal history, if you've ever been arrested, we always recommend, of course, talking first with a reputable agency or attorney before applying for any sort of immigration benefit. Again, here's a little more about disqualifying crimes. It's important to note that, we can never make a strong statement about something because crimes are often set by each individual state or municipality. So again, what is a felony? What is a misdemeanor? It depends on the exact charge that someone was charged with and where they were charged with. But again, in general terms, a felony is usually a crime that's defined by a possible sentence of imprisonment that's more than 1 year. So again, these are very serious crimes. Significant misdemeanors, as you see there, it's an offense punishable with imprisonment for a term of less than a year, but more than 5 days. So again, domestic violence, as you see, there are other examples there. And the individual was sentenced to time in custody of no more than 90 days. Then we still have other non-significant misdemeanors, which again, if you have 3 of those would disqualify you. Important note, again, we always recommend including traffic violations, although traffic violations in and of themselves do not qualify as crimes that may disqualify you. And again, some examples of the threat to national security area, if you're a member of a known gang, participating in criminal activities that threaten the US, that will disqualify you. Now back to what we were talking about, another benefit of DACA is that it's known as advanced parole. It is permission to leave the country, and it will give you, again, the idea that you will be allowed back into the US because you've obtained this permission. How do you get it? Well, again, you either apply with your DACA or once you have DACA. And there are 3 categories under which are acceptable for the government. if you have a job, if you have work that requires you to leave the US, if you have an education requirement or program outside the US, or for humanitarian purposes. It's important to remember, of course, these are unique times, and due to COVID, we generally don't recommend, that anyone try traveling internationally right now because, again, you'd have to understand and deal with the border conditions in both countries. Very important to remember too that advanced parole, the term advanced means, again, the permission is given before you leave. So never leave the country, before you have advanced parole, and you're absolutely assured of that. And it is important, of course, when you do return to the country at the border, it's not immigration, it's known as CBP, which is Border and Customs and Border Patrol. They do have the authority to deny anyone entry to the US. So again, if, for example, in the past, many years ago, if CBP knows that you somehow violated your status, or if you are entering the US with something else that violates status, it is very possible that advanced parole will not save you. You will, you still are subject to inspection, and CBP has the authority to deny you re-entry. So again, it's not just good enough to say that you either have one of those three categories: work, education, or humanitarian purposes. You do have to go a little further. You have to explain what those are. So you will need to include evidence in your application. So again, if it's for work, you'll probably need some business letters, some proof that you have employment, and some proof that your job is sending you abroad or would like to send you abroad. So again, if you have an itinerary, if you have evidence that you're admitted to a conference abroad, that would be perfect. If you're in school, again, if you applied for a study abroad program as part of your school, again, just show proof that you were admitted to the program, or that you're intending to go to the program, and you have a letter from the school explaining that too, that it's for credit for your degree. And then humanitarian parole, or advanced parole for humanitarian purposes. If you have an ailing member who's in a grave condition, or you'd like to attend their funeral, again, if you have evidence, medical records, proof that the person abroad is related to you or somehow connected to you, you would need to show that as well. And again, it's something as part of the application for advanced parole. So you would prepare that all in advance before you send it to the government, and then the government ideally would give you the advanced parole before you leave. Of course, never leave without advanced parole. So let's say you don't have DACA and you think you qualify. What do you need to include in your first time application? So obviously the government needs to know who you are. We would recommend, if you have your birth certificate, that would be good. Additionally, if you have your passport, school IDs, anything with your name on it, that is something you would want to include. And then you have to hit all of those requirements, right? So again, proof that you came to the US before your 16th birthday. If you came in with a visa or some other lawful status, it would be great to have, that passport with the admission stamp from the border. If you have other records that show, again, that you were living in the US on a certain date. So medical records, employment, school records, vaccination records, birth certificates if you gave birth to someone here in the US, bank statements, tax returns, rental applications, and leases. Anything that, again, is coming from a different party, a third party, that has your name on it, a location and a date, something to prove that you were here in the US. And it is important to show that it was before you turned 16. And I'm also going to skip to that second two down there that says proof of continuous residence in the US since June 2007. Again, very important to show that not only did you come in the US before you turned 16, but you came to the US before June 15, 2007. So again, it has to be something with a date. And then again, let's see, proof presence on June 2012, same idea. It has to have that date because it doesn't have to be exactly June 15th, but we definitely want to show that you were here in June 2012. And it can be any sort of records. There's no specific requirement of what it is. To show proof, that education requirement, again, ideally if you have a high school diploma, that would satisfy it easily. If you're still in school, that's okay too. Just we would recommend including your school transcript showing that you are still in school, or your GED. or of course, if you were honorably discharged as a veteran as well, the DD 214 will suffice. We have been telling our clients, and we generally prepare our clients so that they have one piece of evidence for every month of physical presence in the US since 2007 until now. And why is that? Because we have heard in the past that, again, immigration, if there is a specific time that's missing from, in the application, immigration can ask, because again, part of this is the idea that you have been in the US since at least 2007 until now with what they call continuous residence. So again, if you took a very brief trip outside the US, you still may qualify, but immigration may ask questions, of course, about if you don't have evidence showing you've been here every month since 2007 until now. So again, some pitfalls that are common, and what we've been hearing again about what immigration's been asking for. We would absolutely, ask for proof of your education requirement. And we would not recommend applying for DACA if you don't have proof of your degree, your GED, or your honorable discharge. Again, evidence of criminal dispositions. So again, even if you had one non-significant misdemeanor, you most likely otherwise qualify for DACA. That's okay. We would still recommend, though, that you get the criminal disposition for that. So what that means is, if you have the paperwork from the court showing that you were charged with this crime on this date and the case is closed, it's always best to include that with your application to show to USCIS, because they may ask for it otherwise, and that would make it much messier. If you left any time between 2007 and now, it may disqualify you. Again, there may be an exception for very brief and casual trips, but it does depend. And again, we would recommend, if you ever have any questions about DACA, or if you think you qualify for DACA, to please contact a reputable immigration attorney or legal aid organization such as us. It's always best to have a full immigration intake before applying for anything for immigration. There may be other areas of immigration you may qualify for, or something to think about before you, set yourself for DACA. And just a few other things about DACA. So the filing fee is $495. That is for the first time application, as well as every other renewal application. So DACA lasts 2 years. So from when you get your first grant, they will give you 2 years of grant. And again, that means you get your employment card that lasts 2 years. And you will need to renew it every other year. And again, the fee for that is $495 each time. And unfortunately, there is no fee waiver for DACA. If you have any other questions, if you think you qualify, if you think you know someone who qualifies, you have questions, again, feel free to contact us. My name is Kenneth Willer. Our Director of Immigration is Lia, and our contact information is here. Again, we're in Highland Park. Our phone number is 847-737-4042, and our website is listed there, nslegalaid.org. And if you'd like to email us as well with a question instead of calling us, you can email us at info@nslegalaid.org. Again, just a quick reiteration that, again, if you are listening to this in the future, please remember that things do change frequently with immigration and with DACA. So it may not be relevant at the time. And also, if you've heard rumors, again, we do recommend just speaking with an attorney first before making any actions. Thank you, and have a good day.